I first had an experience, one of the first I can remember very, very strongly, when I was under the age of 10. I think I would like to say it was around about 6 or 7, but I was at preschool or school or whatever it was, and my auntie Hilda would pick us up from school. And she would take us to the game place, the toy shop, and say, what do you want? And I would always buy this Space 1999 Lander Airfix model to make. And I would go home and I would make it and blah, blah, blah. We'd stay the night and whatever. It was to give my parents a break from, looking after us, because they had 5 kids, right? Okay, and they're running businesses and stuff. And I remember very strongly sitting next to her, and she was doing something. I wasn't even aware of what she was doing. But she had her legs mostly bare, and I looked at her toe, and I got this overwhelming feeling. I said, Auntie, you're going to get gangrene in that toe and have it amputated. I did not know what I was talking about, but those are the words that came out of my mouth. And she said, what are you talking about? I was a nurse during the Second World War. You don't know anything. 2 years later, she got gangrene in that toe and had it amputated. That is one of the most strong memories of what I have since learned is a psychic ability, or something along the lines of what is modern times called remote viewing. Hence, I have a blog called remoteview.icu. Okay? And I welcome you to go and see there. You can see various stories. I think more those kind of stories are behind the paywall because they're not related to my open research. Another time which I can very strongly remember, as I was living in a place called Burgess Hill, and so those that have lived in the south of England will know where that is. And I had a place called Royal George Road, and I had a studio in one of my bedrooms where I was building my animation facility, nascent animation facility. I had the first render farm of any size. I had a whole bunch of Deck Alphas, which were like £14,000 a computer, right? People scoff at, I'm going to spend £1,000 on a computer. These were 14,000. I had a bunch of them. And so if you typed in render farm way back then, it would come up with the image refinery as the top listing on Google. And that was me. And in fact, one of the current render farms that is one of the biggest in the world, called Garage Farm, was actually a Polish guy who I sponsored to come to the UK to work with me. And he saw my business. And when I moved to India, he took that business model, married a South Korean where the internet was fast, and had an apartment in South Korea racked out with servers doing hit render farm stuff. Anyway, that's an aside. What happened was I got one of these same feelings I had with my aunt twice, only twice during thunderstorms. Many, many thunderstorms, but only twice did I have this particular feeling that the house was going to be struck by lightning. And both times it was struck by lightning. The first time I lost a bunch of computers. The second time, wise to it, I unplugged all the computers. It's coming, it's going to hit again. Like, this is a couple of years later. And what happened was I had left the ADSL dual 64 kilobit line plugged into my server through the ADSL router. And the lightning strike went through that and took out my server. And I was that day delivering an animation project to a major blue chip client in London. Fortunately, I had a friend who had set up his ADSL router, and I got on my bike, cycled over there and sent it off. Much, much later, I was doing what's called low-energy nuclear reactions research. And I was in California, in Santa Cruz, at my good friend and colleague Alan Goldwater's lab, Magic Sound Lab. And we had this reactor, and it was in 2015. And I leant down to have a close look at it and my consciousness went funny. It's weird. And I'm on camera saying, I feel weird around this reactor, I need to move away. Also, with ultrasound experiments that we developed later in 2020 and so forth, I came down to the ultrasound thing, and when I'm over it, I got the same feeling. I was utterly convinced that whatever was going on in those reactors is related to consciousness. Absolutely the same thing. Now, later, as my research into this field of low-energy nuclear reactions extended, I came across this woman called Ninel Kulagina. And Ninel Kulagina was a woman that was in the Stalingrad siege. She witnessed humans eating their own family. She had a major injury where part of her body was severely damaged. And that's the kind of level of extreme conscious and mind-splitting torture that sometimes is reported in the Monarch program as a means by which you can get people to manifest these psychic abilities. And in that experience, I believe that led her to be probably one of the most important celebrated psychics or telekinesis practices the world has ever known. And so she was able to do things like inside a, let's say, Perspex box, she was able to move non-conductive, non-magnetic objects around by concentrating and manipulating those things inside that thing. So there's no electrostatics going involved, there's no magnetics. Something is able to come out of her fingers, be consciously controlled, and able to move those items around. She was able to do things like also, someone would hold a synthetic thread, like nylon, and she was able to hold a hand on it and then make it break. She was also able to put a hand on people and it felt like they were burning. Not just warmth from the hand, it felt like it was burning. She could also stop and start the heart of a frog. And one of the people investigating her said, I don't believe what I'm seeing here, some trick you're playing, do it to me. And she stopped his heart, and they had to do CPR on him. This is about manipulating the fabric of space-time, the chi, the life force, the medium through which gravity interacts. Her heart rate would go up to something like 160, 180 or whatever. Her temperature, she would be sweating, and she would have a blinding headache after she'd done these feats. It took such a strain on her, then I think actually she died because of the strain, like heart issues and so on. But she was, after the Cold War, she was studied by Western scientists as well. She could really do it. But you know what? One thing she found, she absolutely could not do these things during a thunderstorm. So what is going on in a supercell that is making it impossible to do telekinesis? I believe it's condensating a matter form that is all through us and in everything all of the time and depleting it. And this matter form, I believe, is a matter form through which you can do ESP, you can do remote viewing, you can do telekinesis, and so forth. Now that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, if you've got a medium through which you can do these feats and communicate and so forth, is there another way in which, what is the means by which you transceive, you communicate, you send a message and receive messages? It's one thing to have a medium through which you do the sending of a message or receive the message. It's quite a different thing to have the ability to be the transceiver. Okay? If you are receiving something, a signal, then it's you must be able to transmit. It goes hand in hand. Okay. So what is it? Well, does anyone know who Luc Montagnier is? Who is he?
He passed away, I think, in well, because of COVID. He did some research on COVID before he passed away, but he, in I think a 2014 paper, it was EMF in water, and then I think it might have been an earlier paper in 2011, which was the same.
It's the Nobel Prize for discovering HIV.
Yes. So you're both right. He obviously did the discovery of the HIV virus before, and he was continuing work of a much maligned researcher who I forget the name of, fill in the blank here. Jack Benavist. Thank you very much. Who did this memory of water kind of concepts, and in 2014 he published that. So we're well versed within the collective here in his work. Well, he died in 2021, January or February 2021, same time as Tom Bearden, which is interesting. We'll talk about that character as well. And what he was doing in the latter days of his years, and I published a Steemit article in 2019. It was partly a remote viewing exercise because I thought something was coming, and it was called Disease Induction by Electromagnetic whatever, right? And I was combining the concepts of Tom Bearden with what Luc Montagnier was researching in his latter years, as it turns out. And what that was is he found a way to record something coming out of the AIDS virus that he could then send to another lab, and then that signal was played back in the lab into a PCR reactor, and it would start to reassemble the proteins and build the AIDS virus. So you could record something and transmit it, and life would start at a distance, effectively. Now, what is that? In my research that I'll talk about later, for those that are not familiar with it, I'll cut right to the end of the line. Something is doing Lena, okay? I realized it had to have been a vortex and a ring vortex, like a smoke ring. And a smoke ring has just a pull vector in. But when you start having fractal wheels within wheels, you then have the vortex with the vector pulling in, but you also have a toroidal structure that is able to produce a tornado into the core. And when you have a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, which I discovered by analyzing the work of John Hutchison. And in this bag, I have some samples. I hope I have the right sample in here. I might not have that. Okay, so I don't have the particular sample in here. These are from 2007. This is iron twisted one way. This is aluminium twisted the other way, right? And iron fractures because it's ferromagnetic. Aluminium twists and turns into a jelly because it's paramagnetic, okay? John Hutchison, when I was with George Hathaway, who sponsored him in his early years in this research, George Hathaway was convinced that John Hutchison was manipulating this once it was conditioned right, using his psychic abilities. Okay, so I'll hand those around and you can have a touchy-feely. That's 2007, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So what I found on a sample I called the fracture sample was yin-yang structures. By that I mean a toroidal structure with a pit in it and a toroidal structure with a cone in it. At one quantization level. At the next quantization level, the only way you could build it is to take that quantization level and rotate it 90 degrees. And that made a ring of rings. And then the next quantization level had 48 substructures. And you had to take that second quantization level and rotate it 90 degrees to make a ring. And these were like footprints in clay, except the clay in this case was aluminium, a conductor. You couldn't see the thing that had made it, but you had to imagine something that had left that impression at these various quantization levels. Now, there was 4 quantization levels that I could observe with a 220 times optical microscope. However, once you've gone wheel, and then wheel, and then wheel, so wheel within wheel within wheel, the third substructure, or the second substructure, that's self-similar to the big substructure. So there's no reason why that can't repeat all the way down, right? And so I said that this is a fundamental structure in nature. And then later we discovered in a plasma reactor in my friend and colleague Henk Uren in Holland, that we saw these plasma structures being made. They were bleeding in between two brass sheets and then blowing up. And when they blew up, many cases they were leaving these toroidal ring structures of calcium oxide, which had substructures, and the substructures were made of substructures. So I found these physical manifestations, and I sent this imagery of these three to the Russian colleagues I've been working with for a number of years. And almost immediately, without comment, one of them, who I'd never spoken to before, sent a paper from Biology of Life, 1995, in Russian. And it was called The Bagel Game. And in there, just as I'd said in this was in 2022, just as I'd said in my analysis of the John Hodgson sample, I'd said that I believe the whole universe is made of fractal tori. In his paper, it said the only possible fractal that can fill all of space-time without leaving any holes is a fractal torus. You can only make a universe in this way, right? So what we're seeing in the John Hutchison sample and in the Henk Uren plasma sample, one is a non-contact, one is, you can see it on video, there's lots going on, is tapping into what nature actually is at the fundamental level. But why was it in a Biology of Life journal? He was studying electromagnetic waves to interact with DNA. Electromagnetic waves to interact with DNA. And because of that, he was invited into a Moscow basement in 1988 to see and witness a coil. This coil, they were putting a 30 hertz AC electromagnetic current through, electric current through, and they had something like a fluxgate magnetometer. It's just a very sensitive way of detecting magnetic fields. And when they put it into the center of this coil, it read an AC 30 hertz frequency. They then turned off the coil. Still 30 hertz magnetic frequency in the center, where the center of that coil was. They then moved the coil away. And still quantum locked into space-time in that environment, where the original center of that coil was, there was a 30 hertz AC electromagnetic signal being detected by the magnetometer. So he didn't believe this. He went to the leading mathematician at the Russian Academy of Sciences. And he said, look, I can't believe what I'm seeing here. Definitely something is happening. Why is it happening? And so what happened was, this guy, Nevesky, he did a treatment extending Maxwell's equations, assuming you've got current going through a wire, Poynting vector comes off there. You've got current going through a coil, Poynting vector, that's where the energy dissipates, comes off an angle. If you do a coil of a coil, then the Poynting vector comes off and dissipates. But using standard Maxwell equations, no any extra fancy stuff, if you make a coil of a coil of a coil, which is what this coil was, you get the Poynting vector closing in on itself, which means energy can accumulate in that point in space-time and it does not dissipate. And in fact, apparently, it was able to maintain itself for 2 days. Still detectable with the AC waveform. Now, if you do a coil of a coil of a coil of a coil, you have a Poynting vector that closes in on itself and one orthogonal to it. And if one collapses, it energizes the other. If one collapses, so it's even more stable. Now, does anyone know what is also a coil of a coil of a coil of a coil? It's DNA. That's why he was invited as a biologist trying to use electromagnetic waves to influence DNA into that basement in 1988. They were showing him the answer. Now, what does this mean? This means your actual DNA is a transmitter and a receiver. Tom Bearden, in his 1983 or 1980s books, a 1990s book like Third Lance and Oblivion, he's a colonel and he was an expert in scalar weaponry and so forth. He said that on both sides of the ponds, they developed these scalar weapons, effectively, that are able to do psychological things, and they were able to what he called disease induction. You don't need to create a disease in a person. You just need to make the body's immune system think that they have the disease, because most of what a disease is the reaction to the pathogen in the body. It's your own body responding to it. The idea is you can broadcast the pattern of, say, the anthrax virus, or the flu virus, or the cold virus, and the bodies would think that they have that disease, and then they would mount the response to that disease by getting their white blood cells and the things that they recognize are the right antibodies. They start producing the antibodies, and they go off and they're trying to fight something. It's a phantom. It's an electromagnetic phantom, which is exactly what was being produced in that lab in 1988. But it's a phantom in the body. A phantom, it's what he calls a Whittaker pattern of the disease, which has been induced in the body. Okay? And when that's there, the body's put all of its resources fighting a thing that isn't in the body. So the stuff goes around the body. Where's the enemy? Where's the enemy? Oh, I'm ready. And there's nothing to fight. Meanwhile, the body hasn't got the resources to fight Guillain-Barré syndrome, a latent infectious mononucleosis. Hasn't got the resources to fight cancers that are in the body, that are always held at bay by the immune system. It hasn't got the ability to fight the diseases that are in the environment that they could catch. So whatever is available for you to catch, or whatever's latently being held back by your immune system in your body, gets you. And because everyone's getting a different disease, I've got cancer of the brain, cancer of the lung, cancer of the kidney, we've got people dying of the cold, we've got people dying of Guillain-Barré syndrome, or whatever it is, everyone's getting these diseases. And it's like, isn't it sad? There's a lot of bad health going around. So you can take down the productivity, the efficiency, and the health of the whole city by broadcasting this same kind of thing that was being seen by Luc Montagnier. You broadcast the pattern. The body sees that pattern, it recognizes it as non-self, but it's not even a real non-self, and fights, mounts a response to it. So what am I saying here? I'm saying there is a means by which you can project this information. Now, what is it? It's not normal electromagnetic waves, because not only do you get a closed pointing vector, when you're operating that wheel within a wheel within a wheel structure, you get something that was discovered by Vladimirovich Dubovik in 1965, published in his thesis in Dubna, the nuclear city 50 kilometers north of Moscow, in 1967. What is that? Thank you. That is what's called the toroidal moment. The toroidal moment is not an electric field between a negative and positive capacitive plates. It's not a north and south magnetic field. It's a very specific new thing in electrodynamics. And it wasn't confirmed in the West. 67, 77, 87, 97. It was in Colorado, they confirmed it. And it wasn't until the late 2000s that Western mainstream journals started discussing the importance and the scientific applications of the toroidal moment. And what I'm referring to is the fractal toroidal moment. What does that do? The fractal toroidal moment, which is emitted and received by DNA, is able to interact with this magic stuff in the environment, which I'm talking about with Ninel Kulagina, which is the basis on which you do your remote viewing, in my view. It also means this. You do not need to do panspermia. You do not need to send a probe out to infect a planet with DNA. Why? Because the toroidal moment interacts with a quantum coherent condensate of relic neutrinos. What are they? They may be up to 5 times more matter in the universe of relic neutrinos as there is ordinary matter. So if you take all of your stars, all of your planets, all of your gas plasma clouds, all of your black holes, you add them all together, that's like 4% of the mass of the universe. There might be as much as 22% of dark matter, and some of that may be up to 2% of relic neutrinos, but it may be all of it, okay? The relic neutrinos themselves are a quantum coherent condensate. What do I mean by that? They're all at 1.95 Kelvin. And that means they have the same wave function, the same wavelength, and they're in phase universe-wide. And the beautiful thing about condensate is if I put in information here, it's available instantaneously at all points in the universe. Now, when you are sending a message with the toroidal moment, with an electromagnetic wave, you have the electric part and the magnetic part, okay? That's it. And to send information, you have a frequency and you have amplitude that you can vary. That's basically it. You can overlay on a carrier wave another frequency, but essentially you're still limited to those modes of transmission. Okay, you can chop the signal digitally, and that's your limits, right? With the toroidal moment, you can have 2 vortex and an antivortex, minimum on each fractal level, and you can have up to 48 around the ring on each fractal level. And each of those on each fractal level can give you these modes. Up, down, with frequency and amplitude, right? Also, in, out, with frequency and amplitude, and then angular frequency at each fractal level. It is unbelievable the amount of variations you can create. If you take 48 times 48 times 48 times 48 times 48 times 48, and their powers of, with all of those different ways you can encode information, it means that DNA itself has the ability to give out a unique signal that's in a unique time start and phase, which is available at all points in the universe. So if you have a planet that comes into the environment where it can start to support life, the information is flooding into every single atom on that planet. As soon as it's possible to start life, it will occur. Right? And this is the same thing that is going on in the conscious field. Information is everywhere, all at the same time. And the thing is, because it's a condensate and it's superfluid, when you input this information, it then is in that superfluid for all time. It's your Akashic record. Now, where does this come into issues of consciousness that you might be really interested in? Because of my interaction with some of these experiments, and because of my interaction with thunderstorms and future experience, and also because I learned of Nina Kaligina's issues during a thunderstorm. Thunderstorms are an expression, particularly tornadoes, which are things that you get out of supercells. This is when the etheric vortices are moving this relic neutrino flux in these patterns, okay? That's when it's at the most extreme, and they cohere this chi, this life force, this prana, into these structures, right? That is the time where you're most affected. So how does that play into general consciousness? In my brain, there had to have been something that was interacting with this. Now, in 1963, it turns out, I find out, they found a magnetic field goes from the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain. They also found out that in the hemispheres, there was magnetic loops. But I had been discussing this subject, and then someone sent me a paper published on June the 15th, 2023. And this was in Sydney Technical University. And they were doing what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging of a brain of their participants in a conscious state in doing cognitive tasks. So they were thinking through problems, right? And when you have oxygenated blood, it's diamagnetic. When you have deoxygenated blood, it's paramagnetic, okay? Using this and the fMRI, what they found was over the cortex, they saw these vortices and antivortices of magnetic flux. What is that? That is the minimum structure you need to create a toroidal moment. So, what is your brain if it's not a reflection of your genetics? Literally, if you go over there 200 meters, you will see the genetics exhibition here in Brno. Genetics basically started about 500 meters over there in the Mendel Monastery, where he did the P studies finding X and Y and hereditary factors. You're literally sitting in one of the most important places for the start of understanding human, bloodline, biology, and so forth. Okay? This whole toroidal moment that your brain can produce is able to put information into the Akashic record, which is this superfluid condensate of relic neutrinos universe-wide. It means, like my friend who I used to perform with on stage, she had a tumor nearly the size of my fist in her brain. A large chunk of her brain gets removed. They said, you're not going to walk, you're not going to talk, we don't know what you're going to be able to do after you have this out. 2 years later, I'm performing slapstick comedy on stage with her. If she had moved to the other side of the universe, she would have got all of those experiences back. The real cloud is the Akashic record. The means by which you interface with that is what I call your cryptographic key. And your cryptographic key is your DNA. And that is first formed when the two gametes come together in the point of conception. That is when a new cryptographic key is minted, or, my friends, an old cryptographic key. An old cryptographic key that can see the entire history of your previous lives in the Akashic record. If you think you've lived a previous life, you probably have. And you've minted that key. Now, this comes to all sorts of issues in general rules on how you should live your life. If you are a bad person in your life, but i.e. you do not live by the ways in which you'd like to be treated yourself, let's put it down to that, right? Treat others as you would wish to be treated. You know what I mean? Those echoes from the receiver of that experience to the giver of that experience will be recorded in the Akashic record. And when you pass from your existence in your mortal realm into the ethereal realm, you might not be reincarnated for another 1 billion years, right? And you're going to have to suffer all of those people you hurt in the etheric realm for that 1 billion years until you have a chance to come back and correct yourself and to learn. Now, imagine you are a twin. Now, in my family, my sister's very similar to me in that she can do this kind of foresight thing. But I was telling William that, have you ever had the experience, how should we put this, where members of your family who you've not met for a while end up doing exactly the same thing? Has it happened to any of you? Or thinking the same? Anyway, my second oldest brother has a thing called the Standing Wave Project. My eldest brother developed a worldwide patent for a resonance engine which produces nano air vehicles. And I learned that this technology is based on resonance. Okay, we're all working independently. I hadn't seen these people for many years, and we end up doing the same thing, right? If you have twins, there's been lots of studies where twins can have experience of the pain of their twin, even though they're nowhere near them. I will often phone up my sister because I feel something's happening to her. Now, has anyone had those kind of experiences where a sibling you can feel, or your parent? Yeah. So here's the thing. If you have a transmitter and a receiver, and it is very tightly focused on a area that's within your bandwidth, there's a sideband, a frequency range over which you can transmit and receive signals. Yeah? And so like when you're tuning an old AM radio, you can start to hear the music before you get onto the actual fundamental frequency. Yeah? Imagine that's the same for your toroidal moment-based DNA-driven and toroidal moment-based thing that's in your brain, which is your transmitter and receiver, which is based off your DNA. Imagine that's the same thing. So if you have two twins, they have the same transmit and receive, largely. Now, there will be a bit of nurture where they might have had different proteins or whatever, and their brain slightly was a different form. But on the gross level, they are accessing the same read-write area. But it's unlikely that their consciousness would have switched on at exactly the same time. So the information might be slightly out of phase in all of the fractal levels. But they're the most likely person to be able to get that information as a twin. Then you've got siblings, and then you've got your ancestors. This is why a bloodline tries to breed within a bloodline. This is why you must not have siblings producing children. Because they will get mad. Why will they get mad? They will get mad because they are receiving the same experiences as the people that are so genetically close to them. Now, Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, they came up with this microtubule concept of what is driving consciousness. This is inside your neurons. There are these chemical structures which at the end have a benzene-like ring. And a benzene ring has what? It has a toroidal vortex of electrons in a coherent state above and an anti-toroidal below. That produces the toroidal moment right at the fundamental level inside millions of structures inside every neuron. And it manifests out to a macrostructure. It's driven by your DNA. They found that this is part of consciousness, or suggested that it might be part of consciousness. Why? Because if you take ether, not the A-E-T-H-E-R, but the E-T-H-E-R, the first anesthetic, or other anesthetics, it shuts down your consciousness. And how does it do that? It binds to these structures in your brain, these microtubules. I firmly believe that if you take a psychedelic, like magic mushrooms or LSD, these also bind, but in a different way. They don't shut down your consciousness. They change your fractal toroidal moment and the manifestation on the grand scale in your brain so that you are not in sync with your particular frequency, that you've been shifted. And your experience that you experience in that psychedelic state is actually a reflection of picking up some other conscious entity, which may not even be another human. It might be another species on another planet in another time. And it's put through like if you could imagine a large language model, it has all the weights in the middle. And you've got an input and an output here. You have a wrong input over here from some sea creature in planet Reticuli, whatever. It comes through your large language model here. And it comes out as a load of nonsense, which you try and interpret the best way you can in some sort of illusion. And it's so real. It's real because it takes over your consciousness. Now, you can be possessed. You can invite people in. Now, how does this work? When you are in love with someone, you hand over a public key to them. They hand over a public key to you. And you are able to have a conscious understanding with them. Even when you're not together, you can feel them. When you're really in love with someone, you can feel every aspect about them. You are almost one. But you're not. You've handed over a public key and you've agreed to be one for that period of time. You can do that with entities that are not mortal. You can do that with Christ. You hand Christ, Jesus Christ, you hand your public key to him and invite him to hand his public key to you. You connect with Christ, a non-mortal entity, an echo in the Akashic record. Now you can also do it to people who are in the ethereal realm. You can invite them in to possess you. You might also, for instance, my daughter here, she, for the first 4 or 5 years of her life, was drawing pictures of these 7 or 8 foot tall creatures with 6 hands, explosions everywhere, like even as early as 2 years old. These were the first pictures she was drawing, and she was drawing them over and over and over again. And she would refer to my wife as not her real mummy. She said, "You're not my real mummy, this is my real mummy." And she never drew herself more than about 7 or 8 or 9. And basically she said her planet was destroyed and her life was ended. And this is her real mummy. When she got to about 5 or 6, she doesn't remember anything of it. And I spoke to my friend Andrew Johnson, and I said, look, I'm a bit concerned about my daughter. She's drawing these consistent drawings about a past life, or I don't know what it is. It was him that told me this could be a past life experience. He told me about this guy in America, and he had this ability to speak fluent Japanese, and he was talking about the fact how he was part of a kamikaze squadron, and he was speaking about the other people in his squadron. Obviously, you know, maybe he died, I don't know, but this TV network in the US took him over to Japan to meet some of the survivors, and he knew things about them he couldn't possibly know. So he was an instance of reincarnation with the same cryptographic key. I mean the private key. He got minted, his DNA got minted with the same private key in his DNA, so he's recalling a previous life. And he's able to see that. When you understand this technology, it explains so much in all of the myths and legends, in religion, in rules in which to breed. You know, why the point of conception is such a sacred moment. Now, you could argue the switching on of the consciousness is the limit by which you should ever consider abortion. But actually, it might not be a previously minted cryptographic key. The entire history of the universe has come down to create a new read and write access, a new Bitcoin access to the Akashic record. You have no right to abort it. No one has a right or a reason to abort it. I'm sorry for people that have been in a situation where they've had to make that choice for whatever reason. And okay, they have to live with that. And they find a way of living with it. But this is the reality. It might be a key that was minted 1 billion times before on 1,000 different planets. It's more likely because we've grown up in this space-time space that it is going to be from here. Because as unlikely as it is for you to meet someone and produce the same cryptographic key, it's more likely on planet Earth for it to happen, right? But I firmly believe in my daughter's case, we minted a new key. Maybe it's because Kim and I are not of the same race. You know, we've got disparate genetics, and they came together to mint a particular key, which is not normally from this planet Earth, as it were. So you have possession, you have foresight, you have madness. Madness. How does madness occur? It might be that for whatever reason, your cryptographic key is the same as someone else's that is already alive. Now, for whatever reason, you have a shock here, and your phase gets synchronized with their writing and reading to the Akashic record, and you might be seeing literally another person on planet Earth, or you might be at the same time experiencing and trying to interpret with your life experience up to that time the experience of another species on another planet, which is real-time read and write accessing to the same random access memory. And so you're literally mad, but you're not mad, you are actually possessed. This is what they said you were when you're in some of these states. And it might be, why does this therapy of taking, like people who get post-traumatic syndrome, or they step into some kind of mad state. It might be because they've witnessed such horrors that they've shut their consciousness down and they've rebooted it at a different time. They happen to be actually accessing someone else's consciousness at the same time. This is why I think, to a degree, the use of psychedelics is able to reset the phase of your consciousness, so you're not in phase with another one. You're not like this. You're sort of slightly out of phase, right? So you can still exist without possession. When you start to understand these concepts in what I believe is the real aspect of consciousness, I think we can solve a hell of a lot of problems. And I'd really invite your questions. If there's anything you want clarified, I've thought about this since before I was 10 years old. And I've sought answers to these questions. Have you got any questions?
Yeah. Maybe more of a technical question, or like just, I'll try to rephrase my understanding that there's like you have this a universal field made up of these toroidal moments. Like fractal toroidal moments, which explains like infinite storage. Basically.
Okay, so I'll pause you there.
Yes.
The relic neutrino is the medium through which light travels and gravity is manifested. Okay, it's this condensate. In clusters, it forms a gel-like structure, and that's what light goes over. But the minimum structure, all matter is made of it. It's only at 1.95 Kelvin. The reason your electron orbits at a particular thing and doesn't collapse in on the nucleus or whatever is because you have a toroidal moment structure in each of the nuclei in your body, and they pull in quanta of these, what the Russians call elementary LC dipoles, which have only got an anapole, which is a special case of the toroidal moment. It was discovered by Yakov Zeldovich in 1954, right? This gets pulled in to every single atom in your body. Energy is extracted if the electrons aren't at the right orbital within the current space-time energy level, or if there's too much energy, it gets pushed out back into that. So the medium through which all the information is traveling is ubiquitous and it's omnipresent. And all atoms in your body interact with it. Okay, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I didn't quite get is how you get from there to like kind of instantly affecting any other part of the field.
Because it's one wave function, because they're all at 1.95 Kelvin. It's all one condensate. So if you take, like Bose and Einstein predicted the condensate way back in the last century. And it wasn't until 1996, 1997 that they managed to take some, alkaline metal atoms, whether it was cesium-133 or sodium-23 or whatever, a single isotope. Right? A single isotope has one de Broglie wavelength, but each atom can have an individual de Broglie wavelength because they might be a different kinetic energy. The rest mass is combined with the kinetic energy, which gives them the de Broglie wavelength in the wave function form of matter. Okay? What you need to do traditionally is to pull them down to nearly absolute zero on a substrate so that all of your metronomes on your substrate end up being in phase. And when they're in phase, they lose their individual identity and they become one wave function. Now, this is universe-wide with relic neutrinos. It's always everywhere, all at the same time. It doesn't, and the weird thing about a Bose-Einstein condensate, you can have one wave function, but you can have a higher density in different areas. So on the outside of your condensate, you can have the same wave function, but it's a lower density. It's really weird to think about it. But in your center, you can have a higher density. Where do you have a higher density? You have a higher density near every gravitational body. So the sun will have a neutrino sphere, the Earth will have a neutrino sphere, the moon will have a neutrino sphere. But the neutrino sphere that's around those bodies is part of the same condensate that's in the matter and is in the gaps in between the gravitational bodies. The reason it's a gravitational body, just to explain it, all of your matter takes this stuff in. It's a guy I work with in Russia from the Russian Academy of Science, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov, wrote the book on this. He did the Psychic Spy program. I translated it during the Soviet period. And he, essentially what happens is, in the Earth has been growing since its it got to the point of being able to grow. So dinosaurs were heavier. No, they weren't. They were lighter. Why? Because the Earth was less massive. So if you go back 900 million years, something like the day was 19.2 hours. If you go back 200 million years, the day was 21 hours, and now it's 24 hours and growing. Why? Because the planet's getting bigger, and it's rotating slower as it goes around like a ballerina or an ice skater, angular momentum things. And so what's happening is within the plasmas, inside the core, your toroidal moments are being formed, and this is what we'll talk about in my second speech later today. This rarefied up to micron scale or even millimeter scale clusters of these relic neutrinos are condensed using these toroidal moment structures in the Earth from 0.25 of an electron volt into nuclei, which are at 938 million electron volts. So you take 930 million times by 4, you get the number of these things that can be condensed from millimeter scale into something that light takes a femtosecond to cross speed of light. That's the size of a proton, right? So extremely small. So the matter is being condensed from extremely rarefied material in there. That has to push through every part of your body and goes into the gravitational well, which is the constant sucking from every point of this rarefied material from the cosmos. Normal matter is created out of that. That then grows the planet. So the interesting aspect of this is the same DNA will interact with the Akashic record differently over time. Why? Because the higher a gravitational body is, there's a change in the space-time metric, which means your interaction with your toroidal moment, even with the same DNA, is slightly affected. The phase space is different. So anyway, do you have more questions?
No, that's good.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question?
I think I really like, in the way I don't have any questions because everything makes complete sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different shape than the way I've learned to think about these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think for Merlin's question, maybe we should get that closer to the thing.
Could you hand the mic? Thanks.
Do I need to hold it, or is it
Just give it close to your face.
Yeah. Basically, this idea of the ether, or how do things phase lock? Basically, you use a different term than phase lock or
Quantum lock.
Yeah, but it's the same thing. It's from a perspective of everything is kind of going backwards in a way. You could time reverse in phase conjugate optics, like Dan likes to say. You could always time reverse towards increased order, but not the other way around. So, and that speaks to that fractal nature of how everything sort of slip knots into like a drain. And it's like, that's the Planck constant, basically. It's like a harmonic cascade towards where everything just like distributes evenly, or it doesn't, which ties in with,
I would argue that there's only two structures in nature that are able to create life and negentropy. And that is the vortex and the ring soliton. And in fact, to make a ring soliton, you need a vortex and an anti-vortex. So all negentropy is facilitated by the vortex.
Yeah.
All negentropy. And this is, I decoded the Zeta-Rotas square. Zeta, opera, tenet, what is it? Oh God, I've forgotten it. Opera is arepo, rotas. Sator is the divine creator from alpha repeatedly to omega, comprehends and works with whirlwinds. And the whirlwind is the vortex.
Yeah.
And the vortex produces what's called a phase singularity. It doesn't come through like a Penrose twister. It doesn't do that. That is not a thing, right? It's not a thing. It comes through to a point. And at the point, at the phase singularity, at any phase discontinuity, the matter, whatever it is, or the energy, doesn't know whether it's going that way or that way, so it just stops. And so that is where you get two electrons, and you'll see this in my speech later this afternoon. You get matter coming in, they lock 180 degrees out of phase, and they become a condensate, and in the basis of electrons, it produces what's called a topological monopole.
Yeah, I mean, to me that sounds like you have to do a sort of, you need to sort of tilt out of to find the right axis to kind of become sustainable. It's basically stacking symmetry operations, right? So
Well, Lord Kelvin thought that all matter was a vortex soliton. But by 1904, 1905, he realized that there were so many atom isotopes being discovered that couldn't be the case. And so they set that to rest. But in fact, they never considered the fractality, orthogonal rotation of these structures. So he just viewed this and then twisting the overall loop that occurs, right, in a number of twists or knots, okay? He didn't consider that it could be a wheel made of a wheel made of wheels. And when you have a wheel, you have a stable structure. And with the closed Poynting vectors, you can, as Tesla realized when he was a boy walking up in the Slovenian mountains, he saw a snowball rolling down. He saw it accruing mass. And he realized that if you keep adding energy into the same location and it's not lost, then it can vanquish anything. And so if you can keep confining energy to a point, then you are able to get to the point of creating what John Archibald Wheeler called a Kugelblitz, which is the German name for ball lightning, but is a pure electromagnetic black hole.
yeah,
And when you get to that, so I think we've probably got very large numbers of continually produced black holes when we go into a conscious state. We're literally creating black holes that are evaporating almost instantaneously.
which makes perfect sense with an ether model.
Yeah.
But I guess in a very simplified way, what you're doing is you're trying to, everything when we use the word quantum or entanglement or phase lock or these kind of terms, we're talking about something that happens in a higher order, what maybe it should be. At sort of higher dimensions.
No.
Okay, but let me just continue.
No extra dimensions are needed.
Because I want to go back to the idea of the toroidal moment,
Yeah.
which I really like the term. I can visualize it, but also that's from my background studying, Dan Winter's work. It's sort of basically time is relative rotation rate, and matter is spinning inertia. So it's all like relative spinning inertia. It's just like stacked symmetry operations that interact. But the thing is, when you start spinning in the ether, or in a super compressible, or in a, you didn't use that word, but it's basically like a superfluid. You could say that, highly compressible superfluid.
I use the word superfluid.
Okay.
At the LC dipole level, but when you get fractal clusters, it ends up being like a jelly.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Which is actually the Ethereum model of the 1800s, which they said is what light propagates across.
And that makes complete sense with a quantum lock, that it acts more at like a jello or jelly at a higher level, because you're sort of quivering into phase. Like a phase lock it's a type of it's like a hug, but it's like a quiver hug. So it's super subtle. So at higher levels, we are connected, sort of like quivering. And that's what like in quantum whatever, entanglement, that kind of very popular word, refers to, I think. It feels like that. But the way I visualize that is just like having these anything, well, in terms of like these symmetry operations that you can stack, and going back to Dan's model, which is this, he has this like star mother kit, which is basically all these platonic solids that are stacked, and they create this,
like the moon model of the atom. Like you have the platonic solids and they're inside, because Moon worked on the Manhattan Project, and he came up with this idea that the platonics fit inside each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so and they create this sort of perfect harmonic spin pump wave thing that becomes what Dan calls vacuum coherence, right? Because it's sort of you vacuum the ether.
It is.
And that kind of also ties really in with what you went on towards the end of your talk with the more spiritual aspect of what happens when two people come together, and it's like the charge density of orgasm that determines the quality of the soul, so to speak, that's incarnated in that moment. And it's all very visual, but I think, to me anyway, but I think the main the main thing that's always the confusion point is what happens above 3D, or what happens, anything above 3D is golden ratio, according to Dan.
Okay, so you will see in the structure that the Sothic triangle, which is always associated with the Ankh. So in Egyptian carvings, you always had the Sothic triangle with the Ankh. And in the energy structures, they have the Ankh and the Sothic triangle mirrored on the other side of the energy structure. So one is yin, one is yang. The Sothic triangle, you take 22 units, you put 2 pins 4 units apart, and you pull them together with a center line above. And this creates a structure that's a engineering, architectural, Masonic way of creating something that's very close. Now, if you project that into a cone, that produces the vortex cone, which is by a series of circles reducing at 1.618. So the circle above is at 618. It reduces at the golden ratio. Okay? Yeah. Now, it's fractal. Yes. Because you not only have the magnetohydrodynamics, which our face is a version of. This is the point of the vortex and the anti-vortex. This is a Sothic triangle, and this is the point of destruction. Okay, we are made in the image of the technology that runs the universe. Yeah. Absolutely, on every level. But it's fractal. So you take that structure, and remember what I said, you need to then, on this side, you rotate it 90 degrees. And because it's fractal, that one has a golden ratio into this side and a golden ratio into this side of the minimum 2, right? And then those also, on an orthogonal basis, have the minimum ratio in. And not only that, the ratio between the top of the apple structure, the apple is very important because it's the secret to all knowledge. Right? According to the Egyptians, the Ankh with the loop is the toroidal moment, but everything below the loop is the secret to all hidden knowledge. And it is the topological monopole, but it's a 2D slice through it. And 2D shows you that the minimum is 2. You only need 2 to produce the structure. Now, from the top of the apple that's produced in the magnetohydrodynamic and the center line, which is through the pupils, and there to the actual center of the mouth, that is the golden ratio. And that is why these are in the golden ratio. It's never been understood before. But all matter has to abide by this universal principle, which starts from the elementary LC dipoles, the ether, the prana, the Holy Spirit, the chi, and goes all the way through to clusters, all the way up. And it just manifests in this beautiful complexity that we call life.
Yeah, I mean, that makes complete sense. It really is, the term that Dan likes to use is like consciousness is a plasma vortex. And that can sort of scale all the way up to, because it does. Yes and no.
There's 2 types of plasma, which the second type I will be discussing this afternoon, that's of any real significance. But I would agree from the point that plasma vortex allows you to get into the structure, because this is how nature wants to do it, of the structure of the substructures of the universe. But traditionally, we understand a plasma to be just ionized matter with the free electrons and stuff. I will talk about a different type of plasma this afternoon, and then you could imagine things that you might also call plasma at different quanta below that.
Exactly. Well, I'm looking forward to getting more into this. You always have a very sort of detailed language about these things that I'm way more vague about them because I visualize them all the time. That's why my language.
Well, I do that when I'm speaking to you. I'm seeing all of these shapes in my head.
Exactly. And I guess another thing I'm wondering about is I look at everything as sort of golden ratio optimized. So it's all of life is kind of just like slightly asymmetry as opposed to being perfectly golden ratio, which is perfectly.
And do you know why?
Fractal. Yes, because we wouldn't exist if we were perfectly fractal.
Yeah, but like you can see it on the structures, and I can show you. The vortex on one side goes up and ends up here, and the counter vortex comes in at this point. So asymmetry is part of the structure of nature. That is why perfect symmetry actually might look pretty, but it's slightly weird.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Right. But the reality comes from the underlying structures that drive the entire structure of the universe. And so a perfectly beautiful person will, on the gross level, look very symmetrical, but they will still have asymmetry.
But an actually perfect fractal distribution wouldn't be matter, right? If something was perfectly fractal, then it would be perfectly distributed. Then it would be in the Akashic, as you say. then it would.
It would just be
Yeah.
the base structure, but
Exactly.
even the base structure should be slightly asymmetric.
Yeah, I mean,
even
there are
at-
levels, definitely, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it becomes imperceptible because you're talking about Planck's distances.
Yeah, and when you say quantization level, would that be synonymous with talking about maybe plasma domains?
This creates domain walls,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
which I call event horizons.
Okay. Yeah,
Because you say domain. I have this debate with this guy called Axel. In fact, it was this week. He keeps going on about domain walls, and I go, I only see what I can see under the microscope, and what I'm seeing is a piece of silicon dioxide, and then there's this part of the magnetohydrodynamic structure where, on that boundary, there is 100% of the silicon dioxide outside and absolutely 0% inside. It's the silicon dioxide, which should be melting at 1,700 and something degrees centigrade, is turned into a bit that cannot exist inside this area but is existing outside of it. So I call it an event horizon. And there's several event horizons at each fractal level, depending on how much the internal phase singularities are spun up.
Yeah, and it all basically comes down to a micro, tiny black hole. And
Or
there's
analog, yeah. Because there's three kind of cosmological models of a black hole, and they're all not consistent with each other. There's the Kerr-Newman, which is closest to this understanding. The Kerr-Newman is where you have a ring singularity, because there's no real singularities. Like there isn't a point where all matter goes. There's a Planck distance where a bit of matter can't go that way, because it doesn't know which to go.
Yeah, I mean,
but there's always a degenerate level where it stops.
That makes sense to think of Planck as the perfect pixel connection,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's about coherence. It's about image making. It's about coherence and meaning. And meaning comes from, it's all fits very snugly. Does the word non-destructive self re-entry make any sense to you in this context? Because the black hole is really something that you need to go through. It's the gate that you need to pass through with, according to Dan, his term would be like, pure intention. Because that's the thing that throughout your talk, you're kind of moving around this, or you came to it towards the end about intentionality slightly and being a good person. And
everything is to
what-
intention.
Exactly.
You can use this ability we all have and direct that intention. So I shared my concepts of how propaganda works with William when I was with him in California, but essentially, if you intend for people to learn something which is actually false, all you need to do is get enough people of different genetic makeup to have their fundamental believe a lie. And then this person, and then this person, you start filling in the gaps. And then someone who wants to find out the truth, even if they haven't been told it, this is the morphogenic field.
Yeah,
When you get enough people filling in those fundamentals, then everyone will understand it as a truth, even if they're not taught it. They will be like the goat that comes out of the womb and starts standing and eating grass. It already knows what to do from the information field.
Yeah, and truth has to be true, so to speak. Because if you can't...
No. I'm saying propaganda is a known application of how the morphogenic field works. You literally get people to write their agreement with the person giving them the propaganda into their access code, and then everyone else picks up the lie. And that's why it's so hard for a maverick to be able to convince people of a real truth when they're already convinced of what they know is true, because when they verify using their access to the Akashic record, they get the public general consensus. And the consensus can very regularly be a lie. So a lie can propagate for centuries with this method.
That makes total sense to me, or longer, but at the highest time scale, it has to die.
Oh, truth will always out. The truth will out.
It just gets crushed by the pressure of the symmetry conditions of the ether.
Yeah.
I'm using sort of my own language for this, so it might be too esoteric. But
That's okay.
You seem to get it at least.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we should probably...
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry,
No worries.
Soon, but feel free to continue.
Okay.
So we still have a bunch of things to go through.
Yeah, sure. Yep, no worries. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.